Welcome to Make America Healthy. I'm Beth Shaw. I'm the founder of YogaFit Training Systems, the world's largest yoga mind-body school, operating as a school for over 25 years. I'm also the author of 4 best-selling books on health and wellness and the host of this Make America Healthy podcast. Our goal at Make America Healthy is to empower you so that you can take control of your own physical and mental health, because you hold the power, and we're going to give you some tools to help you harness that power more efficiently. Today's topic is all about your metabolism and how it relates to cancer and other diseases. So we've got 2 very exciting guests with us today. We have Dr. Dominick Brandy, who is practicing medicine for over 4 years, running a med spa, anti-aging, plastic surgery, all good stuff. And he has published a lot of scientific peer review articles and textbooks. He actually is a cancer survivor and has a very interesting story around that. And he's working on a new project called Natural Insights with Cancer. So we're very excited to have him. And we also have Angela Poff with us, and she's a PhD research associate with the Department of Molecular Pharmacy and Physiology at the University of South Florida, and the co-founder and chief science officer at the Metabolic Health Initiative. She's got a bachelor's degree in biochemistry and molecular biology, a master's degree in medical sciences, and we are super excited to have her on our show, and I will be at their Metabolism conference at the end of January. Welcome to our guests. Dr. Brandy, I'd like to start with you because I'd like to start with just an overview, and actually either one of you could jump in on talk to us a little bit about metabolism. It's a word that is thrown around a lot, and we all know that we want to have a high metabolism, but let's just talk a little bit about metabolism, what it is, and then how it can impact us with a variety of diseases and different diagnoses.
Metabolism is basically the rate at which you utilize the input from your foods, etc. The area that I really have become super fascinated with in regard to metabolism is really the gut microbiome. As you said, I had an anti-aging practice for many years. And I will tell you, about 15 years ago, when I would go to an anti-aging meeting and people would be talking about the gut microbiome, everybody in the room's eyes would be rolling. What the heck is this person talking about? Then in 2006, this new technology came about, 16 RNA gene sequencing, where all of a sudden they realized that there were over 1,000 different bacteria in the large colon, about 37 trillion bacterial cells there. And then we have about 100 trillion on our whole body when you look at our skin and our mouth and so forth. So this became just like a fascinating area of science. In fact, every day there's about 30 new journal articles that are coming out on the gut microbiome. But one of the things that I learned, and I will tell you that for my cancer patients, and I do coach a lot of cancer patients from being in remission to being in a stage 4, stage 3, I really try to encourage those patients to try to eat as much of a whole food plant-based diet as possible. And the main reason is that most people that eat that kind of a diet are intaking about 60 grams of fiber. The average American, to give you an example, is not even hitting 15. There was a CDC study that showed that only 3% of the population is even hitting the 30-gram recommendation. And in men, this was mind-blowing when I read this, 30 to 50 years of age, 0% hit 30 grams.
Wow.
And the average American, this was another study, the average American's eating about 1.8 servings of plant foods per day, and that's counting French fries and ketchup. So we're really not getting a whole lot of fiber, and that's really creating a huge problem. But what we find is that when you eat a high fiber intake, at least 30 grams per day, and I do recommend about 60 grams per day. But if you hit the 30 grams per day, the stomach and the small intestine cannot digest that. In fact, we only have different digestive enzymes that can handle carbohydrates. These gut bacteria, these 37 trillion gut bacteria in your large colon. They actually have over 60,000 of these digestive enzymes. So they make it all the way down to the large colon, and they start metabolizing this fiber. And they create these short chain fatty acids. And there's basically three of them. I think a lot of people have heard of butyrate, acetate, propionate. They're the three basic ones. And what they do is they send a signal to the colon cells. We're just talking about the metabolism part. And these colon cells will then release GLP-1, PYY, and leptin. Now, GLP-1 is glucagon-like peptide factor. It's the rage nowadays with these new semaglutide, Wegovy, Ozempic. They're all GLP-1 receptor agonists. But I always explain to my patient, instead of doing the semaglutide, if you up your fiber, your gut bacteria are going to make these short chain fatty acids. They're going to send a signal to your colon cells, and your colon cells are going to release this GLP-1, which then decreases your appetite, it slows your gastric emptying, and it makes you more insulin sensitive. So that's one of the things that I really super encourage people to do. And we do find that when people eat more of a carnivore diet, the pathogenic bacteria really proliferate at a very rapid rate, and they start snuffing out the beneficial bacteria. And when you're eating more fiber, the beneficial bacteria start proliferating very quickly, even within 5 days. David Lawrence did a study, it was published in Nature, and he showed that he broke the groups into two sections. It was a metabolic ward study, and he broke one into a plant-based group. He broke the other one into a carnivore group. And then every day they analyzed the gut microbiome. And what they found was, even in a day, the preponderance of the pathogenic or beneficial bacteria changed dramatically. For instance, the carnivore diet, there were many pathogenic bacteria that started proliferating very quickly. But Boswellia bifida, it's a cancer that has been directly correlated with ulcerative colitis. That started proliferating very quickly. Hungatella, which forms a lot of which is converted to TMA in the liver, is correlated with type 2 diabetes, atherosclerosis, heart attacks. And then the group that was eating the fiber, the beneficial bacteria, which are the only ones that can create these short chain fatty acids, started proliferating even at 1 day, and they started snuffing out the pathogenic bacteria. So that's one area that I really like to focus on with my patients, as far as ways that they can really adjust their metabolism. The one last thing I want to, and you've probably heard about these studies, but they've repeated them over and over again, and they always come out the same way. They take identical twins, and one is obese and one is lean. And they take the obese twin and they do a fecal transplant.
Yes, we had a woman on the show who actually had a company that was doing these fecal transplants.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then the lean rodent becomes fat. And then when you do the opposite, you take the fat twin and you put it into a lean rodent, it becomes fat. And the opposite happens. The lean twin, you do a fecal transplant of the fat one, it becomes lean.
And they also say that our microbiome becomes much like whoever we spend the most amount of time with, which be careful who you're hanging out with.
Every time you kiss, you're exchanging about 80 million different bacteria, because people don't realize that. It's crazy.
Yeah, but that might stop a lot of people who are listening to this from kissing some people. In any event, that could be a whole different topic for a show. Thank you so much, Dr. Brandy. There's a lot to unpack with the microbiome and metabolism. Angela, tell us a little bit about your work with metabolism.
Sure. In our lab at University of South Florida, we're a metabolism lab. We also specifically focus on ketogenic metabolism. So ketogenic diet is something that over the past 10 years or so has gotten a lot of traction in terms of kind of mainstream public conversation about the diet, but a lot of people don't really know that it actually has a very long medical history. So the ketogenic diet was developed at the Mayo Clinic actually over 100 years ago, and is a very well-established and proven standard of care therapy for refractory seizures. So these are seizures primarily that are occurring in children when they have failed a certain number of anti-epileptic drugs. Children are much more likely to respond to the ketogenic diet. The ketogenic diet is interesting in that it really shifts the metabolic phenotype of an individual kind of away from carbohydrate-based metabolism and into a stronger preference for fatty acid metabolism. Ketogenic diet being a higher fat, lower carbohydrate, moderate protein diet. So it really changes many things on a cellular level about what's happening in the metabolism of an individual. And being a preclinical research lab, we are very interested at that kind of subcellular level. So when we think about metabolism, we are appreciative, of course, of the whole system physiology, metabolic landscape, but we're also very intrigued by the specific metabolic chemical reactions that are essentially carrying out all of the functions of a cell. And when I think about metabolism, when I speak about it, I like to think of it as related to what Dr. Brandy was saying, the way that we take the energy and the building blocks that are coming into our body through food, and we break that down, going from large to small. That would be catabolism, catabolic processes, taking the food that we're eating, those macronutrients, converting it into these small packets of energy like ATP, breaking down into its component building blocks like amino acids coming from your protein, glucose coming from your carbohydrate, fatty acids coming from your triglycerides and fats that you're eating. And then you have these small component building blocks and the energy that then our cells use to actually function. So to run all of these millions of chemical reactions that are taking place at any moment in time. And the flux and flow through these pathways is really operates like a symphony. And it's very important to maintain a flux of these pathways in a proper way. And when they get out of sync, so to speak, you can actually see that these disruptions are very common among different diseases. So disruptions in metabolic pathways, for example, glucose metabolism is altered in many different diseases. So our lab studies primarily cancer metabolism, and then also how metabolism is affected in neurological conditions, and in particular neurodegenerative diseases. So in both cancer and in, for example, Alzheimer's disease, you have abnormal glucose metabolism, which is a little bit odd, but
that can be tested, right? I just actually did a blood test because we had one, I don't even remember what guest we had on the show. Might have been Dr. Barry Sears, but talked about there is a simple blood test that you can get to see where you're at with that.
Right. I'm not sure exactly what test they might be referring to. Dr. Brand, if you have any ideas, please jump in. But on the larger scale, of course, we think of understanding kind of our glucose insulin sensitivity as being a major marker of kind of how at a macroscopic scale our glucose.
I believe it was an insulin resistance test. Oh. Dr. Brandy, you familiar with that?
The way that I pretty much check insulin resistance is with a fasting insulin, and then you can do a glucose tolerance test. The hemoglobin A1C kind of gives you an idea what your glucose is running over a 3-month period. And then there's a fasting blood sugar, which is everybody gets those, but I'm not sure exactly how much information that gives you, but that's pretty much what I use to measure insulin sensitivity.
So I have a question for both of you. It's a little bit more of a general question for our listeners so that they can more understand metabolism. Would you both agree that metabolism is something that can be shifted within an individual at any point in their lives? Or do you find that like people who were more athletic when they were younger, did not have excess body weight, typically will have a faster metabolism even as they age?
I would say absolutely your metabolism is extremely adaptive and responsive to an individual's diet, to the timing that they eat, to their sleep, to their muscle mass. That's a huge lever in terms of affecting your metabolism. So the more muscle you have, the muscle is soaking up excess nutrients just to maintain its presence. So all of these things are going to affect an individual's metabolism. So it can always be altered. I will say, I think it's generally accepted that there is it seems to be some level of kind of metabolic memory, so that people who do have better metabolic health when they're younger, it's easier sometimes for them to maintain that. But of course, it can be outdone depending on how far someone might change their diet or become very sedentary or something. It can always, of course, adapt very quickly
And
to
is
become
there, because I'm obsessed with muscle, I'm obsessed with getting stronger as I get older. I weigh anywhere from 146 to 150 pounds. I'm 5'10". And typically I'll have anywhere from 68 to 71 pounds of muscle on my body. And I'm like, okay, I would like to increase that. But is there something bad about having too much muscle on your body? Does it reach a tipping point and then after that it's a law of diminishing returns? Or should everyone who's listening, if you're into it and you like to go to the gym and lift weights, should we all be going for as much muscle as we can get on our bodies?
I can answer that.
Thank you.
First off, as far as cancer patients, I really try to get them to do resistance training at least 3 times per week, because one of the things with cancer patients is you want them to have good insulin sensitivity. And we do know that as you lose muscle mass, your insulin receptors get downregulated. So you get accumulation of the sugar and you also get accumulation of the insulin. What a lot of people don't realize is that cancer loves sugar. I think everybody knows that. They have a lot more, they only use basically one glucose molecule can only create 2 ATP molecules in a cancer cell because they use a fermentation type of respiration. However, they have, depending on the cancer, they can have anywhere from 3 to 10 times the number of insulin receptors. So they can soak the stuff up extremely quickly and create, in many times, just as much ATP as a normal cell, which one glucose molecule typically forms about 36 ATP molecules. But when patients get older and they start losing muscle mass, they become more insulin insensitive. So their glucose levels start rising, their insulin levels rise. And insulin is another very powerful growth stimulator of cancer. Most people don't realize that. And it can also be transformed into insulin growth factor 1, which if you go through the scientific literature, when that is high in people as they age, they have much higher incidence of cancer.
And that's not the same thing as growth hormone, is it? And Dr. Brandy, because you did run a longevity clinic, I know a lot of people who supplement with growth hormone. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
I'm totally against that.
Okay.
Yeah, because one thing I preach to people is that when you get diagnosed with cancer, you have about 5,000 mutations in that cancer cell. Mikhail Menschke wrote a really good article in Nature on this. And by the time a cancer patient relapses, they're up to about 12,000. So I really try to do whatever I can as far as diet and so forth. For instance, one reason I recommend a whole food plant-based diet is plants have 63 times the antioxidant power compared to animal products. So antioxidants, as most of us know, they neutralize free radical activity, which free radical activity, when it's in excess, it causes a lot of this DNA damage. So it's something that I really emphasize to my patients. And I find that diet actually keeps the glucose under better control. I think they have much better insulin sensitivity with that. And we might have a little disagreement about the keto diet, and we can get into that a little bit if you want.
Yeah, I'd be happy.
We love it when people disagree. We've had people argue on this show.
I'm not going to argue, but I think because I know that I have a lot of cancer patients that go to these holistic clinics and they're putting them on ketogenic diets and they're not doing well. And I can get into why I think that is. So
yeah, I am interested. Obviously, ketogenic diet research in cancer is largely in the preclinical phase right now. There are probably, I would say, at least 40 human clinical trials ongoing right now. Most of the data in ketogenic diet and cancer is coming from brain cancer, which could be a unique use case for ketogenic diet and cancer because the brain is really well adapted to utilizing ketones for energy. Yeah, but it is interesting because there is a lot of successful reports in the preclinical literature on ketogenic diet in a variety of cancer models. And then, of course, we're still waiting on data from large-scale human trials, but there's encouraging case studies and case reports and small trials out there. But yeah, I'm interested to hear what your concerns are about it. Obviously, it's not, there's no guarantees in cancer for across the board, but I do think it's likely to be a useful tool in some situations.
Yeah, first off, it's very difficult to maintain eating 50 grams of carbs every day. Most people start feeling tired. They just don't feel good on that much carbs.
I can personally say I carb cycle because I can only go so long without having some.
Yeah. If you look at the blue zone areas of the world where people live the longest, Sardinia, Icaria, Nicoya, Costa Rica, Okinawa, Loma Linda, which is right in California, they all eat anywhere from 90 to 95% plant-based. And they are the healthiest people. You don't find a culture in the world that eats a keto diet that has the longest longevity. And those cultures eat on average about 80% of their diet complex carbs. About 10%.
They also don't have GMO, and they're not spraying their crops with glyphosate and some of the other
I'm not sure
maladies
about I'm not sure about Loma Linda. In fact, one thing I heard a podcast one time, it was a resident that worked at Loma Linda Hospital, and they did studies on the diets of these different vegans. And I was shocked, like the average vegan in Loma Linda, 14% of their diet are these processed plant foods. Surprised by that. So I'm sure there's some processed stuff going on there. I wouldn't say GMO, but I would say if it's processed, there's probably some problems with that. But the main problem I have with a ketogenic diet in regard to insulin sensitivity, and it has been shown through magnetic resonance spectroscopy that one of the reasons people do get insulin resistance is they get accumulation of saturated fat in the muscle and in the liver. And it mucks up the GLUT4 insulin receptors. So they just don't work adequately. And they've found that when you put people on a lower saturated fat diet, and then you redo their magnetic resonance spectroscopy, the fat is gone in the muscle and the liver, and that become insulin sensitive. I have personally seen some of my patients that have tried keto diets, and they were doing great. One was actually a diabetic, and he was doing great as long as he was on the keto diet. But as soon as he went off of it, his blood sugars went totally out of control because he was insulin insensitive at that point, because he mucked up his insulin receptors so much that they weren't, the muscle and the liver wasn't really intaking the sugar properly, and then the insulin levels were jacking up. And there was an analogy that I saw that was great. It says somebody that has they're crippled and they're in a wheelchair. And a ketogenic diet for someone like that, let's say being in the wheelchair is you have diabetes, is you keep them in bed all day and they never leave bed. And they're perfect as long as they're in bed. But as soon as they get out of bed, they fall. The treatment is you fix their legs. And that would be making them insulin sensitive by putting them on a lower saturated fat diet. In fact, when they do rodent studies, when they try to push rodents into diabetes, they actually put them on a high saturated fat diet in 6 weeks, and they are in totally blown diabetes when you do that.
Yeah, but the high fat diets that are used to induce diabetes in rodents are Western diets. They're definitely.
I would imagine a lot of palm oil and a lot of those other oils that hydrogenated things that we don't really want to be putting in our bodies.
Yeah, and they usually contain at least 30 to 40% carbohydrates as well. So I definitely agree that probably worst case scenario is a diet that is high in fat, high in saturated fat, and also high in carbohydrates or higher in carbohydrates, especially if those are coming from simple carbohydrates. And that's really what those rodent diets are. They're like a recipe for diabetes.
Yeah. I think everybody agrees. One thing that I do like about keto, paleo, and all the vegan, all the controversies, carnivore and so forth, they all agree that we should eliminate ultra processed refined carbs.
Absolutely.
Because that's probably one of the worst things that you can do. In fact, I just read a study, for every 10% increase in ultra processed food, there's a 10% increase in cancer rates. So and there was a huge study. It was a 16-year study. It was in Spain, and they followed these people for 16 years, and one group ate more of a whole food diet, and the other group ate very high ultra processed foods.
And Dr. Brandy, for our listeners who may be confused as to what's processed versus ultra processed and is going into a supermarket and maybe trying to avoid everything in a package or a can or a box, can you just give us user-friendly rundown of what's considered ultra processed versus processed?
When you make a recipe, it's processed, right? If you go to the grocery store and you get Ezekiel bread, that's processed, but it's very healthy for you.
Unless you're gluten intolerant like I am. And I used to actually get mental confusion after eating Ezekiel bread.
Then you shouldn't eat it. But I would say there's a basic equation that I teach my patients.
Okay.
If you take the carbohydrates and you divide it by the fiber, the number should be 5 or less. For instance, with crackers, there's a cracker called Top Seeds. You can get on Amazon. I think they have at Trader Joe's, at Whole Foods. TOPSDDZ. That equation, there's 10 carbohydrates, 3.3 grams of fiber for every 10 grams. You divide that in, it's like 33. The number comes out to 3.6 or something. So it's below 5. So that's what I teach my patients. When you're going through the processed food section, use that equation, memorize it, and then you'll be able to decipher if something is, because even I did a whole video on how to pick whole wheat breads. You go into the grocery stores, there's 25 different whole wheat breads, and probably 2 of them are just white bread that they color white or brown. But if you go through there and you actually use that equation, you can really pick foods out that really have high fiber content, in which those typically are not going to be what I consider ultra processed. When you go to the market and there's muffins and potato chips, Doritos, I consider all of those like ultra processed foods. I tell people to totally eliminate those kind of like snacky type foods. In fact, the snack that I always recommend is you just go and get some organic popcorn kernels. You put about a quarter cup in a brown bag, you throw it in the microwave for about a minute and a half, put a little extra virgin olive oil on it, a little bit of salt for vegans because they need their iodine, and a little bit of nutritional yeast, and you have a fiber-packed, healthy, tasty snack that you can eat while you're watching a football game. So it's like an interesting little snack that I recommend for people.
That's awesome. Thank you.
I was just going to say, before we move past the conversation about ketogenic diet and cancer, Dr. Brandy, maybe one area that you'd be more interested in is the role of ketones themselves. And that's actually a big part of why we are studying ketogenic diet as a potential anti-cancer therapy. So I think in popular conversation, a lot of times people just discuss this idea of limiting glucose availability to the tumor with ketosis or reducing insulin. And I think that's important. So I do think part of the potential therapeutic benefit of being in ketosis is that you have this baseline reduction in both glucose and insulin. That's a modest reduction, but you do eliminate these postprandial spikes that occur when you're not eating a pretty low carbohydrate diet. So I think that's part of it. But I honestly think that the literature suggests that the elevation in ketones themselves, these specific molecules, beta-hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate primarily, are playing a really important role in the effects that we are seeing. And it is probably not too closely related to their actual energetic role in providing energy, but actually through signaling mechanisms. So over the past decade, we've learned that these molecules possess very potent and very specific signaling effects, and that they interact with the DNA, act as histone deacetylase inhibitors. They have their own endogenous cell surface receptors that activate cell signaling cascades. They influence immune cell function. So there's actually a lot of preclinical data showing an enhancement in anti-tumor immunity in the presence of, for example, beta-hydroxybutyrate. You see a reduction in the expression or activation of very classic kind of oncogene signaling pathways, reduction in inflammation around the tumor. You see an enhancement in antioxidant capacity. And these are actually signaling effects. One thing that we are interested in, and I'm interested in ketosis as a tool in the tool belt, where and when it makes sense. And there's many ways to go about that. And I think ketogenic diet is one of them. I think a lower carbohydrate, I totally agree with you, whole foods based diet that is restrictive in these simple processed carbohydrates, but then potentially with supplementing ketones, because there's now exogenous sources of ketones that we can actually consume that might be able to provide some of this benefit. And it's what we're seeing now in the cancer realm. We're trying to explore how could we optimize delivery of this potential therapeutic strategy. It's similar to what happened with epilepsy, which early on it was essentially assumed that if someone's going to use ketosis for epilepsy, they have to use this very strict ketogenic diet. But we now know that there's alternative kind of strategies that can be used, like MCT based diet or a modified Atkins diet, that are still efficacious. So for us, we're very interested in untangling these intrinsic anti-cancer effects of the ketone molecules themselves. And in fact, they share many specific effects to entire classes of chemotherapeutic drugs.
If you go into, I just did a post on ketogenic diets, and there were two really good articles in Cell Cycle Journal by Bocelli and his group, and they actually showed that ketones increased breast cancer cell proliferation by 2.5 times. And they also showed that mortality rates in these cancer patients like significantly increased when they were on a ketogenic diet. The thing that concerns
trial, I know the mouse study that you're talking about.
Yeah, so and it was you're probably familiar with the reverse Warburg effect, like these keto.
I know.
The ketosis diet was actually like pushing the cancer cells into an oxidative phosphorylation, the way that a normal cell operates.
So in those model systems, interestingly, those specific papers, they overexpress ketone utilization enzymes in the cell lines. So they literally overexpress these ketone enzymes that would then allow the cells to uptake ketones to a super high degree. And they did see this reverse Warburg effect in those couple of breast cancer papers. These are the ones that came out in probably 2012, 2013 or so. Is that the
they were more recent than that. I'll send them to you. The thing that does concern me about keto diets is they restrict whole grains and they restrict legumes. And for instance, in 2001, there was it was a meta-analysis that came out of the American Dietetic Association. And they looked at all the articles up to that point. There were 45 that looked at whole grains in relationship to cancer. 43 out of the 45 showed that whole grains had a very potent anti-cancer effect. Like with breast cancer, all the hormonal cancers, it was like 6 out of 6. Colorectal was like 10 out of 10. It was very dramatic. And I actually just did a post on how legumes actually have an anti-matrix metalloproteinase activity. Matrix metalloproteinases, one is, for instance, collagen, which is a good name, describes what it's doing. They actually eat away at the extracellular matrix, which allows these cancer cells to metastasize. Legumes actually have a very potent anti-MMP9 effect. In fact, in this one study, they evaluated 8 different legumes, and the one that was the most potent, most people never even heard of it, was lupini beans. Now, lupini beans were first, soybeans were second, and then garbanzo beans were third. They were the 3 most potent.
Great. So everybody listening, eat your edamame and have some hummus that preferably you make by yourself. We are getting super technical today on this show. So if you, the listener, want to feel really smart, I would suggest you listen to the show a couple of times.
Okay, awesome.
We've unfortunately run out of time because it seems like we could talk on this topic all day long, but just getting back to the basics that our listeners can implement in their lives starting today. If you can each of you, name 3 things that you suggest for optimal health, metabolism, and avoiding diseases, I would like you each to list them and then tell our listeners where they can find you.
Sure. I think eating a whole foods-based diet, avoiding excess simple carbohydrates, especially sugars, and doing resistance training, especially as we age. And you can find more information about what we do. Metabolichinitiative.com is our website, and we have our live conference that we host at the end of January coming up, January 25th to 28th, 2024 in Clearwater Beach. We also have virtual ability to attend virtually, and then we also have an online educational platform where healthcare providers can earn CMEs for listening to some of the world experts in these topics, and that's metabolichinitiative.com.
Great. And I'm very much looking forward to being at your conference, the Metabolic Health Summit, January 25th to the 28th in Clearwater Beach, Florida. I know that it's a leading medical and scientific conference on metabolic health, bringing together world-class experts, physicians, scientists, and thought leaders to share insights. and advancements in the field. So actually, I'm going to be teaching yoga there and maybe doing a couple of other things. So you can join me in person or secure a virtual seat to participate from the comfort of your home. But you know what? In person is so much better for all these events. Use my code SHAW15 and you'll get 15% off at checkout at the metabolichealthsummit.com. I hope to see you all there. Dr. Brandy, where can we find you?
My website is naturalinsightsintocancer.com. That's probably the best place to get me. I have a very active Instagram site. It's called Cancer Veggie Doc. I have over 97,000 followers on there, and I do a post every day. I do 2 videos and 2 recipe videos every week. In fact, I just filmed a video right before I got on here. But as far as my 3 recommendations that I would like to make is the first one, try to eat 30 different plant foods per week. The American Gut Project in Colorado showed that people that ate 30 or more different plant foods, and that doesn't mean servings. You could have a salad with 20 different vegetables in it and a soup that has 15 and you're up to 35. But they showed that people that ate greater than 30 different foods had the healthiest, most diverse gut microbiome. Second thing is to make sure you filter your tap water. You would not believe what is in your tap water.
I'm a huge proponent of that. Yes.
Yeah. And I think if you can get reverse osmosis, I think that's probably ideal. And
and it's not that expensive to get you have someone install a filter in your kitchen, at least, so you have clean drinking water. So important.
Yeah. Because you can't believe what is in drinking. There's even chemotherapeutic drugs in there. It's scary what is in tap water. And then the third thing would be to exercise every day to the point of sweating. And I advise people to get into a sauna too, at least 4 times per week, because that's a great way to detoxify, to get rid of a lot of those toxins that we are all exposed to on a daily basis.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, both of you, for being on the show. It was very insightful, very detailed. I'm going to need to listen to the show again just to get everything. So thanks again, Angela. I will look forward to meeting you in person at the Metabolic Health Summit. And we would like to thank the sponsors of our show who make this show possible. Thank you to Life Boost Coffee, the cleanest, most organic coffee that you will ever consume. They have over 35 different flavors, and they have a new flavor that I designed for them called the Mindfulness Blend that is half calf. Their coffee is mold-free. It is free of pesticides and toxins. They pay their farmers an equitable wage. You can get it at lifeboostcoffee.com. You can use the code YogaFit to save 15% at checkout. Check out our mindfulness blend if you don't want to get too jacked up, but you want a great cup of coffee that tastes delicious. Check out lifeboostcoffee.com. We'd also like to thank our sponsor, blushlove.com, the leaders in sexual wellness products made for diverse body types and everything you can imagine. If you're a practitioner of yoga, they even have Kegel balls. You can check out their high quality products at blushlove.com and use the code YogaFit to save 15% at checkout. So Valentine's Day is coming up one day soon. So get yourself a gift or get one to share with your partner at blushlove.com. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, Zirconia lasers. My dog has cancer and I'm using an Zirconia high-level laser on him. They have lasers for animals, for horses, for dogs, for cats, and for people. And red light therapy, in particular, the Zirconia lasers are good for pain, for inflammation, for scar tissue, for calming. They have settings for gingivitis, chronic infection. Whatever you or your pets are suffering from, you can check out these Zirconia lasers. They're also great for vets and vet techs. So check out Zirconia lasers. And last but not least, we'd like to thank our sponsors, YogaFit Training Systems Worldwide, the leader in yoga, mind, body, fitness education. We have lots of virtual courses online for enthusiasts and practitioners, for mental health professionals. We've got a whole therapy track, yoga's primary healthcare. Operating as a school for over 25 years, YogaFit is the leader in yoga, mind, body, fitness education. There are online platforms and ongoing classes that you can sign up for. You can find me on Instagram at Beth Shaw Health. You can message me off my website, bethshaw.com. And until next time, everyone, stay healthy, stay happy, stay positive. Keep educating yourself because your health is your most valuable asset always. And without your health, you don't have anything. So let's all make our health our number one priority and let's make America healthy. Thank you to our guests today. If you enjoyed this show, please share it with as many people as you can. Namaste, everybody. Thank you.